Thank you for listening to the On Background podcast with Roberto Alejandro, available on iTunes and Google Play Music, and of course at onbackground.com, your place for news and discussions about hip-hop, poverty, and policy. I'm your host, Roberto Alejandro, and I'm joined today by Poet Deep, Baltimore hip-hop artist, whose mixtape is out now, Straight for the Throat, and is available at impoetdeep.com. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. I appreciate you for having me.
No, absolutely, absolutely. Tell me a little bit about yourself. How long have you been rhyming here in Baltimore?
Well, when you say rhyming, do you mean just engaging in the art, period, or actually being on stage?
No, let's start with engaging in the art. When did you first start to encounter hip-hop?
Encounter hip-hop, ever since I probably was maybe 4 or 5 years old, but actively, actually writing rhymes, composing my own lyrics. I've been doing that now for close to 19 years.
Okay. Was there a moment when you became a hip-hop head, or was it just always sort of in your milieu?
I would say the moment is when I first heard Rob Bass.
Okay.
It Takes Two. That's what really had drew me into hip-hop at the time.
And then was your first engagement through MCing, or did you start in another path?
Actually, I really started in music first. I really was into singing, primarily first. But the more and more I was listening to, like I said, Rob Bass, and then there were other people that followed behind that played a influential aspect as far as me making that conversion. Whereas though I have nothing against singing, but I don't really have many ambitions of singing anymore.
Okay. And then how was it? What was it like starting off? Around what years is this that you're starting to MC?
This is around 1994, 1995.
Okay, so this is kind of, in a lot of ways, maybe the beginning of what a lot of people consider the golden era. That sort of kicked off by like the Nas's of the world, the Illmatics, the Biggie's Ready to Die. Were those kind of some of your influences at that point?
To be honest with you, Nas wasn't in the beginning.
Okay.
I began to appreciate Nas way later down the road. Mine was primarily starting off of like Bone Thugs and Harmony.
Okay.
Biggie, he did play a role. Tupac, Mobb Deep. So those were like my starting influences, because hip hop had already evolved past a certain stage. When I, because you have people that have, like I was listening to Last Born Child's interview, whereas though he can give you that 80s era of dealing with hip hop. Whereas, I'm younger than him, and I don't have that actual perspective, from that time frame.
No, absolutely. I mean, I'm a bit younger than him as well. And, the moment where I became a head was Naughty by Nature's Hip Hop Hooray. So that was about probably 93. And when, I knew of other hip hop songs before then. And obviously probably the most sort of popular commercial example was MC Hammer, which is, not what a lot of people think of as like hardcore real hip hop necessarily. But in terms of someone who had a broad commercial reach, at that moment in time, he was probably the biggest example. But the first time I heard Hip Hop Hooray, that was the song that made me a hip hop head for life.
Right.
And then, as you get older and you're trying to learn more about the music and the culture, you go back and you start to listen to the forefathers that I was too young to have been aware of really in the 80s.
Understood.
Tell me a little bit about the Baltimore you grew up in. What were your formative years, like your teenage years, at the 90s as well?
Well, my teenage years was more so after, starting around 97 into the 2000s. And if you're asking me, like, what were my activities like back then, it was primarily school and being outside. And, I remember when I was 14 years old, I was actually going to Edmondson High School. And I failed up there my first year. And my mother sent me to go live with my father, who lived in Owens Mills in a community called Newtown out there. And due to the situation and conditions out there, not really a lot of recreation and things like that. I didn't really have anyone spending any personal time with me. So I really fell into the judicial system. I started really getting heavily involved with crime. So that's where things started to take a turn for me. I was around 15 years old around that time.
What do you think were the biggest contributors? Was it mostly the lack of supervision, or in terms of you entering the streets a little bit?
Well, I think it's the same almost for anyone. It's the family institution. When we look at society and what the crack era did, it destroyed families, black families. And with that destruction came a lack of order within the home. Now, some people throughout the years have been able to maintain and sustain stable, functional homes, right? Now, I had my father on one side, then I had my mother on another side. And my father at the time, his understanding of a father was to provide shelter for the most part, food, clothes, and shelter. So that was pretty much that. So it was a lack of supervision, a lack of engagement. I believe that when you have children, you have to have, same way like you have a business plan for a business that you're to pursue, you to have a plan for your children, as far as the end goal of what you would like for them to be or assist them to be, and what are the necessary tools and things like that are required for them to do that. And the activities that you engage them with will dictate will they meet that or not. So
no, absolutely. Was the problem of crack addiction present in your own family situation?
In my immediate family, yes. In my household, my uncles.
Okay.
Actually, one of my uncles, he was murdered when I was 3 years old.
Oh, wow.
And then my other uncle, he was a drug abuser. He was a drug addict. He's gotten himself together. He's clean now. He has real estate. I mean, he has done a total 180, but it was not like within my mother or my father,
Sure,
but
yeah.
actually my father actually was a drug dealer himself.
Okay.
So, and that was another aspect of certain social practices and things like that was of his, because he was literally, from the streets, and, he had children, but he's someone also who has changed his life. He's actually, he's a pastor.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. He's made a lot of great leaps and bounds
Definitely,
and things
yeah.
like that, in his life for the betterment. And, but like I said, crack was not something that devastated my family to the extent that I saw in some of the other people's homes. Whereas, and what I mean is, I would go over some of my buddies' houses and things like that when I was younger. And the household, I mean, I never grew up in a household where nonsense was allowed. I would be disciplined, even with my father. Even though my father did not spend quality time with me, he maintained a clean home. He was a working man, It's not like he was an individual that's walking around unrefined, I would say,
Sure, yeah.
The way he carried himself. And I couldn't just get away with just doing anything. I couldn't just, it's not like I had a family where I could walk around pants hanging down inside of my home or any of the homes that were in my family. So the devastation of what crack did as far as morally to a lot of families, I didn't experience that.
Do you remember that first passing of your uncle at 3 years old?
Oh, yeah. I remember it just like it was yesterday, because in actuality, there were some cheerleaders who came to the house to notify my grandparents that he was killed. And I still remember that, I remember what went on in the house, the crying, and basically the trauma of what it done to my family.
Sure.
It was a painful night. I can't remember every single instance, but just the energy of that night, because at the time, he was 18 years old.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, when he was killed. So, when you have people knocking on your door at night telling you that your son has been killed, only, I guess, someone who has been through that could really start to imagine, what that is about, that type of grief.
Did you carry that with you moving forward through your childhood? Do you feel like that's something that from 3 years old that sort of stuck with you as one of those sort of early formative experiences?
Well, of course. I mean, in human, when you just deal with human history or just the psychology of humans, period, there is no absence of an experience that doesn't shape your thoughts and your behavior.
What do you think was the way this particular experience impacted you in terms of your thoughts and your behaviors?
Well, at that point, then as I was young, it was fear. That's what that had instilled into me. The message changed later on, you know, by living in a society that I lived in. That message was reinforced because, you know, that wasn't the first time of me being around someone's death and things like that, you know. So in the initial phases, it was fear. In the early years, it was fear. But as I got older, you know, there was a complete conversion to, you know, I mean, of course, there was still an element of fear, but then there's a kill or be killed mentality that started to develop within me at a certain point.
And was that particularly when you started to find yourself in the streets around 15, or was it even before then?
Well, it was a little bit before then, because naturally I'm a friendly person. I rather get along with people. I don't come from a family or a background of scheming, shysters, people who don't value self. And the only way that they find value in self is by affecting other people. And the reason why I bring up my background is because a lot of the people that I knew that go for bad, they were basically, it was a spinoff of what they've learned from in their social structure from in their home, you know, because of the voids and things like that that they had to fill. And I understand that, but I wasn't raised like that, you know, and even being in the streets still didn't make me that way because that wasn't who I was before I came to the streets. So with that being said, there was within me a thing, whereas I'm a friendly person, and I generally did not understand how other people were at a young age. So, you know, I used to get into a lot of fights, you know, because of my kindness. I had a lot of people taking my kindness for a weakness, right? And, you know, a lot of stuff came along. Came along with that.
Do you feel like the problem of violence, especially in inner city communities, is driven in part by what you described, that sort of lack of socialization that occurs, especially as a result of sort of the intergenerational traumas that poor persons in inner city communities have generally experienced, that it's sort of robbed them of the ability to really sort of socialize those in their midst, especially their children, in a way that avoids some of those consequences? Or do you think it's driven by something else entirely?
Well, it's driven by something else entirely. I mean, primarily when, let me ask you this. Are you familiar with B.F. Skinner and his rats?
No.
Okay. I'm going to try to make this simple without going
sure, yeah.
too out in the ocean, right? You've had people that have conducted studies, experiments to see how to maintain a controlled society where individuals are engineered to have certain wants, to have certain needs. And these wants and needs become profitable for the one that is in control of the means of engineering. So when I say that, it is no secret. You know, I know a lot of times the word white supremacy is thrown around a lot. It's thrown around very loosely, almost to an extent that the actual meaning and how it actually functions in society is negated, and it's not really understood at its deepest levels. But it's because of white supremacy as far as why these things happen, because white supremacy has a bearing on people activity. And what I mean by people activity is when you break down, humans have activities that we engage in that express our humanness. And when you have people that have a control over the resources, over the propaganda, over the information and things like that, you can change how people relate to each other within a given social context. So when I bring that to B.F. Skinner and his rats, what he did was he had rats inside of a box.
Okay.
And what he did was he created in there, he had a side that if a rat knew that they went to a certain side of the box, they would be electrically shocked. It wouldn't kill them.
Yeah.
It would shock them. So what happened was, at first you kept having the rat kept going to that side. And what happened? It would be shocked. Once that rat after a while, that rat realized that if it keep going over there, it's going to get electrocuted. So the rat just didn't go over there. Then he created a sideways though if a rat went to another portion of the box, it would be rewarded. So it was basically a microcosm of a reward and punishment within a box. But what it really reflected was the relationship or of the dominance that white people have over black people in society. That's what the study was really about.
Yeah.
But when you look at it like this, when you look at as black people who do not control resources and things like that, you know, they say follow the money. You just have to look at it that it is profitable for black families to be disunited. It is profitable for us to be consumers. You know, it is very profitable, and we have to understand that people that are in power have went to great lengths to neutralize our culture and our ability to be able to connect with it. Because not only connecting our culture, it allows you to connect with other people and other land masses. And even when you look at Africa, you know, Africa is not a nation full of African leaders who are actually running it. You actually have more so European and Asian people that are neo-colonialists that are controlling it. So to bring all of that into a small frame is that whenever you want to control the people, you have to control the institutions in which they attend and which educates them so that they're able to socialize within a certain context that gives you the right and it gives you the authority to do what you deem is necessary for you to develop the type of doctors, the type of lawyers that are deemed necessary to be of a service to these type of people in this situation.
Do you think the denial of education, which is a phenomena that goes certainly back to slavery, and you know, I think if you look at most places where there are high concentrations of African Americans, there's generally a lack of decent public education, and
that's necessary.
Exactly. And so, do you think that is really that denial of education is at the root of a lot of the issues that we find in poor communities of color in the United States?
You said the denial. It's of course. I mean, the way how we understand education is to draw forth, it is to bring out, not to program someone to be a robot, but it is to impart something to a human being that draws out of a spirit from them that comes from God, that allows them to bring another dynamic to earth that will be a blessing for many. So of course, denial of education, you know, but we have to also ask what type of education, because different cultures of people deem the standards of what's necessary for the members of their nationality that qualifies as a good education. So even if we were getting the type of education, if everybody was able to end up going to Harvard or Yale, like even my son, I have a son that's 14 years old. My son goes to Poly, and he more than likely will be on the road to getting in what is called a quote unquote good school in this society.
Sure, yeah.
However, one must ask, what does his education allow him to do? Is it going to teach him how to be independent? Is it going to teach him how to be a father for his family? Is it going to teach him how to be well-versed in economics as far as developing economic infrastructure for the black community in the face of gentrification? So we have to ask, when the good education for who and for what? Yeah. So, you know, it's a loaded question.
It is a loaded question. Let's stay on that issue of the relationship between the sort of education that is provided persons of color, the way it might be used to develop or stunt their progress as human beings, and then that question of the community's response to gentrification, right? Because I think one of the challenges for a lot of poor communities of color in the United States when it comes to the phenomenon of gentrification is that they've disengaged so much politically that it becomes that much harder to fight something like that, which generally has the support of from the business community to the political establishment to, in my observations, oftentimes even members of those poor communities, especially older persons and homeowners who are often, who feel threatened or are concerned about the property values because of things that might go on in the community. You know, what I see older African Americans say to police at community association meetings is very different than the conversations I might have with younger African American, especially men, say on a corner in Sandtown, Winchester, in terms of, you know, their broader perspectives about how to deal with the issues that exist in a community like that.
Oh yeah, I'd like to say something to that.
Yeah, go ahead.
One thing that has to be factored in is that black people are the most politically naive people on earth, period. That's a historical fact, right? And when you speak about the disengagement, that goes back into of what I said of when people are engineered within a certain social context that behave a certain way. So when you look at the behavior and when you start to notice the difference of the older versus the younger, I don't know how familiar you are with the Willie Lynchism, because see, in a given society, the older and the older should be able to sit down the young and give them that wisdom. We are moving past that point now, right? Because we have had a period whereas after the strong thrust of the civil rights in the 60s and the black nationalist movements that were moving in the 70s, there was a major disconnect between the old and the young. Whereas now you have with the old, not all of the old, but they lack a fundamental understanding as to why are they behaving the way in which they are behaving? Why do they have these particular interests that are destructive? And I'm not saying all of them are destructive, because I was one of those individuals, and I know a lot of those sisters and brothers that are a part of the downtrodden. They're very creative, loving individuals. However, they do not have the necessary institutions that are around. Prime example, right? I don't know where you grew up at, but when you have certain communities that are about uplifting the people that are in that community, the people are aware of the resources that are available for them to be able to transcend their current situations. When you grow up in these neighborhoods, you do not see on these billboards, you do not see spray painted on the walls the many doors of opportunity besides just go get a job. Yeah. That's what you see.
No, absolutely. And let me ask about that, because it does seem, especially in a place like Baltimore, that inevitably when we're speaking about poor black people, getting a job means getting some sort of entry-level, probably physical labor type of job that has no real opportunity for advancement, right? Like maybe one day you'll be supervisor of other people doing what you're doing now, but that's about as much as you can hope for. And do you think that in no small part perhaps contributes to the reason, especially young persons take to the streets? Because, you know, most people have greater ambitions for their life,
of course,
which is not to like demean those jobs or those, you know, for those people who do them. You know, I do believe all work has dignity, but it's one thing to say that when people choose the path that they go in terms of their work, as opposed to when it seems predetermined. Do you think that the lack of sort of viable legal paths to real success is what drives people to perhaps what might be a shortcut in terms of the streets?
Of course, it's the whole thing about access. You know, it's just about access. One time, Chris Rock, he made a joke, right? I like Chris Rock sometimes because you got to really listen. He can say some things that are very politically profound, and he said a black man has to leap to an opportunity that a white man could just skip to, right? Now, let's look at society. Are there poor white people? Yes. Are there white families that are being destroyed in this process? Yes, that is happening, right? But when you look at it on a majority basis, it's about the access that people have. When you look at different legislations and policies of districts and zoning and things like that, and the funds that are allotted at certain institutions that allow for people to be able to partake on certain opportunity. There's like right now with gentrification, there's money that's being funneled into the city. But these inner city neighborhoods that's so high with crime, it's not designed for them to necessarily have a recreational center or build some more jobs in the private sector that's directly around them. Directly. Yeah. So, you know, we complain about somebody that slangs dope or something like that, but, you know, it's like he's surrounded by nothing but foreign businesses, Asians and other people who are totally detached from the community. And I'm not making an excuse for someone that sells dope. whereas they have no other choice. They have choices. But when you do not grow up in a resource rich environment and you have people articulating to you as you're being young for you to understand what your options are, you start to make decisions within a small cluster. I see that in society all across board. It's not just for black people. I see how people can be given information and how they've been raised to how they perceive options has a lot to do with the decisions that they make.
And then let me ask a question about the term black community, because I feel like oftentimes one of the things we don't talk about is the fact that in the United States of America, the black community was in a sense created, right? Like European colonizers started essentially shipping people who might not have otherwise had any connection to one another.
Kidnapping people?
Yeah, exactly. But
okay.
they stole people and then forced them to come here, enslaved them. And then, we fought a civil war, legal slavery ended. And even, we basically filtered folks into similar economic arrangements. But at some point we've said, oh, we forced you all here. Now you're a community. And I feel like sometimes there's a lack of recognition that we sort of, when we say black community, we're kind of demanding that people accept something that was imposed on them, right? Whereas their identity might not have revolved around first the idea of their blackness as like an entirely sort of racialized phenomenon. But we sort of want people to unite on the basis purely of a sort of shared trauma. But not because these people came together, were otherwise a community on their own. Do you think that impacts part of the ability to engage politically and organize politically to fight against things like gentrification?
Well, of course. I mean, because you said that something is imposed. It's an imposition. So when you're dealing with the imposition, we have to look at, okay, it's an imposition, but what also has to be factored into is the social relationships and the social arrangements in society, because when these individuals came out of slavery, a new form of slavery, you had a lot of people had to go back basically into slavery under the sharecropping system. So it's upon your worldview in which how you view it was legally over. It's like, yes, that, but then with the 13th Amendment, it continued, and then now today what we have is corporate slavery, which is another form of plantation slavery. But back to the point that I make is that the social arrangements, when you have people that are our people or my people that came out of slavery or chattel enslavement, when they come out of that situation, what resources do they control coming from a society like that? And they were not given reparations. No. So it's not like, okay, this community or these individuals, I believe it was like 4 million at the time. These 4 million individuals are going to get $6 billion for them, right? They were not given that. So what I'm saying is it was set up for the wealthy to continue to rule, just in a different fashion, but to still rule. In other words, is that the political disengagement would only come natural out of such situation. However, there have been many initiatives by different groups here in America that have went for independence. And Tulsa, Oklahoma was a shining example of people who were politically astute, people that were developing their independence and building relationships with other entities overseas before the United States government played a part in their destruction. However, there have been signs of political engagement. But
am I correct? You're referring to the Black Wall Street?
Black Wall Street, 1921. Yes. So, the political disengagement that you see today is that we, on a mass level, have been orientated into thinking the way in which other people want us to think. We have been addressing the concerns of what other people want us to concern instead of really sitting down among ourselves and saying, what is exactly our concerns from a historical analysis that we need to be concerned with and what we need to do about? Because a lot of times we're not paying attention to the things that we're faced with, because a lot of times we're not focusing on the historical raw reality that we're faced with as a people.
And is it the sort of one, deprivation of resources that you've talked about, but also the deprivation of education, which makes it harder to sort of step back and take a look at that broader historical scope that
Right.
sort of drives that difficulty in unifying the community then?
Of course, yes, because anytime a people position themselves to acquire power, they have to have shared values. And when a people do not deal with a historical analysis of their position to deal with politics, you kind of don't even have a starting ground on where you stand at. When you look at most people that deal with the political process or engaging with political parties, they can run down the history of different individuals, what they was fighting for, what good did this do, what bad this did, because they understand it from a historical point of view. But if you're left out of that situation, and then the propaganda that you have bombarded in your general society has nothing to do with political disengagement, has nothing to do with political engagement. Prime example, let's look at the primary example on the media of black families, whether it's TV shows, I don't even remember what they call them, sitcoms or something like that. I don't really watch TV that much, but people can say, I'm watching a funny show. This doesn't mean that this is racist. This doesn't mean that people are really like this or someone is attacking you. What people have to realize is that society is, when you're looking at people and when you start to notice in an overwhelmingly way that these people or black people are being represented a certain way to society, it informs black people of how they must be and the aspirations that they must have. So you don't have too many TV shows whereas you see a functional black family where the father is really studying politics. Like that is part of a brand. Like when you see movies, you're always going to run into that father or that uncle who is studying politics, or that mother who is working on developing petitions and policies and things like that, and she's getting the community around. And you won't see anything like that on a mass level because that is not something that they want to be popular. What they would like for us to be popular is to be consumers. What you see is people who have on very nice clothes, driving very nice cars. Some people, they're very faithful to their corporations, to their professions, who actually benefit other people outside of their community. So basically, the whole social arrangement through media and exploiting of our image is to make us ripe for exploitation.
Do you feel like some of that propaganda, as you've described it, influenced your own entry into the street life as a teenager?
Of course.
And then what was it for you, having entered that life, that helped you chart a path out of it?
Well as I had access to negativity, I had access to positivity. So when I started to make a change, to me, things just came full circle. I've always been a very logical, calculating type of person. I've been that way since I was young. And I knew that certain things that I've been involved in my life, the fact that I'm still alive, my life has almost been taken on 4 different occasions.
Wow.
So, and I've done a number of things that could have landed me in prison for a number of years. Besides the fact that, like even when I was 18 years old, I was arrested for attempted murder. And, that was a moment, that was a partial moment of truth where I was sitting down and I said, if I don't make it out of this situation, I can be here until I'm either an old man or damn near getting very old. I can lose a substantial part of my life. And when I paid attention to a lot of the brothers that I was around in the jails, of how they lost a substantial part of their life, I understand what it does to them, the underdevelopment.
Speak about that.
The underdevelopment that takes place of when you have brothers or my brothers who continuously go through the penal system, and what I mean by the underdevelopment is that you cannot properly grow into manhood being inside a prison cell. I know a lot of brothers say, I became a man in prison. That's not true. You are not even afforded to be a man in the sense of the word. Now, did you tap into your warrior spirit, learn how to protect yourself and stand up for certain things? Yes, can't deny you of that. Did you learn how to have tough skin? How to keep that game face on, I give you that. But it deprives, it deprives the brother, and it also deprives the family to who he was a father to, a son, because he's supposed to have a position in his family. And when he's not in that position, that leaves a brokenness. That's like a table that is meant to have 4 legs, and you move one of those legs. That table will not stand the same. And that's the foundation of the black family, because a leg is missing. But what I was seeing is that my mind frame would only bring about more destruction. And not only that, I was a person who always see it. And I was a person who was kind of, I don't like using that word, lucky. I was fortunate to be around certain people that made me aware of certain resources at a certain age. So like, I didn't mention about how when I was, when I got arrested, when I was living with my father when I was 15, that eventually landed me in jail. I was charged as an adult, and I was locked up for a while as a youth. But I've always been a very social person, always. And I could always hold a conversation with anyone. It doesn't matter how old you are, your ethnicity, your background, your social status. I've talked to, whether it's been, your millionaires all the way down to your homeless people. And I've always given it my full attention. I've always believed certain people had a message for me. Even if they didn't even have the best interest for me, I will extract what I need from the conversation. And one thing I learned is that this is a thinking game. This society is a thinking game. If you are to make it, to survive and to prosper with the odds stacked against you, you are going to have to think your way out of it. But the thinking has to lead to a plan, to execution. But, you have to think. And I've always carried those things with me. So even when I was sitting in the jail cell, that was still running through my mind about the thinking aspect.
Let's speak a little bit about the thinking aspect, because obviously you're a hip hop artist.
Yeah.
And because of a lot of the history that we've talked about, I feel like out of poor communities of color in the United States, there isn't always a sort of established intellectual apparatus in the way that it has traditionally existed in the white community in terms of philosophy or social theory or things like this. But there is in art a lot of engagement with the same basic ideas, right? It's maybe not an essay or a book, but it might be there in the form of a song or just in a different form, but the substance is still addressing the same thing.
Yeah, I think it exists. It's just, the thing is, in society, a lot of times it's about what people learn to validate and what people feel valid, because it comes by way of a certain institution or a certain group of people who have been authorized and given a stamp of approval. And then you have a certain sector of society who have not been given that stamp of approval. So it makes their work seem lesser or not as refined.
Yeah. And obviously we can't say like there's no philosophy or social theory that comes out of the African-American community. You have W.E.B. Du Bois, you have Frederick Douglass, the autobiography of Malcolm X are sort of prominent examples, like big picture examples. But there is this sense sometimes, but it doesn't seem maybe as developed or at least as engaged in, those works. You get like the real conscious people know about those works, but some other folks don't engage with them as much. Do you feel like hip hop could kind of bridge that gap in terms of the divide between the community and that political engagement by providing that apparatus?
Yeah. Hip hop can definitely play a role in that. But in order for it to resonate with the community, it has to be more than just music. It has to be reflected in fashion. It has to be represented through the artists and things like that. And not only that, it has to be something that it becomes part of the new cool. Because music, don't get me wrong, music itself is a force. But we also have to look at the messages that the neighborhood, the community has brought in. It hasn't just been music, because the music industry, they use the fashion industry. They use their ability of making TV shows. They use other different agents to get their message across. And we have to be about the same business if we are to bridge that gap.
Would you like to see, because I feel like in Baltimore, you have a lot of hip hop artists who are conscious, even if not all of their music is strictly conscious, it's always kind of there underlying, part of the maybe some of the more street aspects of what they're doing.
Some form of social awareness.
Yeah, but it doesn't feel like, as someone who's been here for about 2.5 years and covering policy issues and political issues, it's not like you see a ton of members of the hip hop community getting down to Annapolis to testify about bills, or is that something that has to happen more direct engagement with policy beyond just sort of discussions in the music about social issues?
Yeah, I mean, there needs to be involvement. I mean, you have people, I mean, you have different groups here in Baltimore. Like you have leaders of a beautiful struggle. You have different people, right? That hip hop artists, first of all, I can't say hip hop artists can affiliate themselves with any group, because some of these groups I do not know what their policy is of how they engage with different people, right? However, the music sector for some people is just a point of expression, because even though you have a lot of socially aware artists, you do not have enough artists who are actually community servants, whereas they talk about the conditions, they see the conditions, you know, but they are not actively engaged. They're just a musician, that's it.
Yeah.
So what has to be done is that there has to be a movement first that helps to convert more hip hop artists or people that's just in the music community period to being involved. And you have different people who are stamping that with themselves as hip hop artists. So it's not like it's not happening, but we need more artists who understand that no, it's not sufficient enough to just be on the mic talking about these conditions. We need to be able to see and understand that you're out in the community too. So when you have young children that are listening to you and things like that, they say, you can't have one without the other. You can't have the mic without the community work. You know, you can't have one without the other, you know.
Are you hopeful that that sort of movement could emerge, whether in hip hop more broadly or here in Baltimore in the near future? Or do you think that, you know, we're still like at a sort of laying the groundwork stage for something like that?
I think we're laying the groundwork, but we also got problems that we're going to have to face. And I think sooner than later, as I was saying, gentrification, you know, it's going to take years for people to really understand the effects and the impact that this is going to make. Because the areas that are being gentrified are actual music communities. And when you have these music communities that are going to change, the populations of people that are going to change, you have certain artists no longer allowed in certain places with certain type of content, because these businesses have to appeal to the population that is around them and keep them functioning and running. So I am hopeful, you know, I am hopeful that this will, you know, that this will take place. However, there are other things that I think we have to be mindful of while, you know, having hope.
I really appreciate how much time you've given me, and I don't want to keep you here too much longer, but I do want to speak a little bit about Straight for the Throat. This came out April 15th of this year.
Yes.
And so tell the folks a little bit about what they can expect to find on the mixtape.
Well, basically the mixtape, it's a piece of work that I put out because I'm actually working on an album. I'm working on like 2 projects right now, because I have I'm with a band called Connected Collective. And we actually have a show on June 10th. And anybody that's interested in that, you can go to my Facebook page, I Am Poet Deep. Facebook, I Am Poet Deep, and you can find out more about the location and things like that. But I just wanted to put something out because I have a lot of material that's in the stash. You know, sometimes I don't really get to put out the music the way I want to, because not only am I active in music, I am very active as a father in my children's life. I have 5 children. So, and my wife and I, you know, we do a lot. So with that,
I can only imagine.
Yeah. So with that being said, what you can expect is you're going to get some wisdom. You're going to get some lyricism. You're going to get a reality check. You know, basically, I call it Straight for the Throat is because in the album cover is actually a pit bull that is in a jumping position, like it's going to go for your throat. That basically is no games. It's not a game. You know, that's the whole theme behind it, that it's not a game, straight to the point, getting straight at it, no delay. And the content just varies between showing my ability as being a lyricist, but then aside from that, speaking on certain political aspects. Like I have a song called Young King on this project, and it actually is giving instructions to our young brothers out here in the streets to give them food for thought that can give them another frame of reference of thinking before they make certain decisions. You know, it's very empowering, you know. So you could really expect a range of different things. Like, you know, I go on different topics when you know, that's just the type of individual that I am anyway. You know, I'm very diverse and my subject, my subject matter. So it's a diverse project.
Excellent. I really appreciate you spending so much time with me. Poet Deep, the mixtape Straight for the Throat, is out, available on IamPoetDeep.com. Thank you so much.
Oh, and last thing I'll say is that when you go to my website, you go to my front page, you'll see the album cover. Just click it. It'll take you straight to it. And guess what? You get the download for whatever you want to pay. It's pay at your price. So you can't beat that.
Absolutely. But support Baltimore hip hop, y'all. I mean, it's important that we not just kind of download everything for free.
Yeah, you can't download it for free, but whatever you choose to pay is what you get.
That's great. I hope people will support the project, and our artists got to eat too.
That's right. Most definitely.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you.